So, you've heard the news.
Found guilty.
Guilty.
Found guilty.
Donald Trump was found guilty on all 34 counts of falsifying business records in a bid to illegally influence the 2016 election. The election in which he went on to become president of the United States, as he covered up a potentially damaging story of an alleged affair with porn star Stormy Daniels.
Some attitude, I love it. Beautiful, looking good, lovely smile.
And now you're wondering, if he appeals, which he almost certainly will, could he win?
This was a disgrace. This was a rigged trial.
There was nothing legal, there was nothing normal about what happened in this New York courtroom over the last month and a half.
I'll say right now, nobody but Trump and his lawyers know precisely what angle they'll take to try to have his conviction thrown out. But there are big clues based on the objections Trump's lawyers raised during trial and what Trump himself said immediately after learning he was a convicted felon.
This was a rigged decision right from day one with a conflicted judge who should have never been allowed to try this case, never.
If you only watched the early part of this trial, it would have been easy to think that this case was about hush money being paid to a porn star. But it was actually way more boring than that. This was a case about documents, about how expenses were accounted for. So why did we hear so much about Stormy Daniels rolling up a magazine with Trump's face on it and spanking him with it? Or the testimony that Trump didn't wear a condom? Even the sex position they were allegedly in. For starters, Trump denies any of this even happened. But the defense also says all of this is accomplishing nothing but making our client look bad. And they made that clear to the judge at seemingly every turn. Objection, 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 objection. And when Stormy Daniels introduced details like she had blacked out and that there had been a power imbalance during their encounter, the defense argued they are essentially making this into rape, which is totally improper. What they're saying here is that none of this has anything to do with the legal question of falsifying documents. These are just salacious details and accusations whose only purpose is to make Trump look like a creepy scumbag.
A lot of details came out. That's very prejudicial. It is irrelevant. It could have impacted his ability to get a fair trial. So he'll raise that point.
Now, the prosecution says, you guys started it. Trump's lawyer started it by denying in opening arguments that any affair had even taken place, effectively, preemptively calling Stormy Daniels a liar. So, the prosecution argued, we needed Stormy Daniels to paint a vivid picture of their encounter to show that she's believable and not a liar. The judge ultimately allowed her testimony.
Do you think the judge was fair throughout this case?
I think that there were times when we very much disagreed with what the decisions Judge Merchan made.
Let's go back to what Trump said to reporters right after the jury convicted him.
It's a rigged trial, a disgrace. They wouldn't give us a venue change. We were at 5% or 6% in this district, in this area.
He's talking about how many New Yorkers voted for him in the last election. New York isn't exactly Trump country. The entire state was a clean sweep for Joe Biden in 2020.
I do think it comes to something that we talk about a lot of times in our profession, where there's a bias that you have that you can't get past.
The defense has argued it was impossible to find an unbiased jury, especially in a city where Trump is so well known, where he built his entire career.
Every single person on that jury knew Donald Trump, either as president, as candidate, from The Apprentice. And so I don't accept that this was a fair place to try.
Trump's lawyers actually tried to have this case thrown out last year, wanting to have the case tried in federal court instead of a local New York State court. They said because the checks he purportedly wrote to Michael Cohen, reimbursing him, he wrote during his time in office, he should have the right to be tried federally, where perhaps the odds of drawing from a more Trump-friendly jury pool would have been higher. Remember, you only need one juror to disagree with the prosecution to stonewall the whole case.
In New York City, and in particular Manhattan, to try to pick a jury, with people who will not be predisposed to loathe him, which many people here are. You can understand why his team would be concerned about getting a fair trial in a county that is just overwhelmingly politically and personally against him.
Trump has consistently argued, without evidence, that this trial was politically motivated. The judge disagreed, so the trial went ahead. But this could be one avenue where the defense sees the possibility of a do-over, even if it won't be easy.
One, he's a New Yorker. Second, this is where the crime was committed. Third, the fact that he doesn't have high political support doesn't mean that the jury couldn't be fair and impartial. I don't think, given the three facts that we just laid out, we'll let them get to victory on that point.
There is another grounds for appeal that Trump's team could take. It's complicated, but maybe the most important one, so we saved it for last.
They say a misdemeanor, but they try and bring it up to a felony if there's two crimes. They have all these different things.
It's this idea that the prosecution never explicitly spelled out to what end they believe Trump falsified business records.
It was a fairly novel application of a New York election law, which said the falsification of business records, that alone is a misdemeanor. How do you kick it up to a felony? You have intent to commit or conceal another crime.
It wasn't really made particularly clear in the filings by the DA's office what felony they were charging.
So this makes things tricky for the defense, right? How do you make a coherent legal argument when it's not even clear what law their client broke? So let me give you an example. Maybe some jurors thought Trump falsified business records to illegally hide the fact that these hush money payments were actually election expenses. Because if voters found out about that alleged affair, that could have tanked his bid for the presidency. Or maybe some other jurors thought that the purpose was something else, that the records were falsified to skirt tax law.
Where someone gets murdered by being hit with a stick, stabbed with a knife, shot with a gun, multiple different ways. You have to prove that the person was murdered, but you don't have to agree on what was the cause of the murder.
But an appeal would hinge on the question of how the judge instructed the jury on this point. He gave jurors three potential laws that Trump might have been seeking to break by falsifying business records, and told jurors they were each free to choose their own underlying crime, with no unanimity required. And from the defense's point of view, those instructions tainted the jury.
Well, I think one of the key issues here is the jury instructions. I think Judge Merchan essentially led the jury to this guilty verdict. We're obviously going to be challenging aspects of those instructions on appeal.
I think it's just a disgrace, and we'll keep fighting. We'll fight till the end, and we'll win.
There are yet more grounds on which the defense could appeal Trump's conviction. For example, we haven't gotten into the question of presidential immunity. Should Trump be allowed to wash his hands of this whole affair because those checks, the ledger entries, the invoices, they were all written while Trump was in the Oval Office? But at the end of the day, we'll have to wait until the full appeal is actually filed to know how this next chapter will play out. What's almost certain, however, is that because of how long this whole process takes, it likely won't conclude until after the election in November.